They said they didn't have it. That's what my parents told me 3 years ago, sitting at my kitchen table with their hands folded and their eyes somewhere else. They said they were stretched thin. That the RRSP was locked in. That the line of credit was maxed. That they were so sorry. My son was 4 years old. He needed a liver transplant. And my parents told me they didn't have the money. His name is Callum. He was born in November in a snowstorm at St. Michael's in Toronto, and he came out screaming so loud the nurse laughed and said, "That one's gonna be trouble." She was right in the best way. By the time he was 2, he was climbing the bookshelf and naming all the dinosaurs and making up songs about garbage trucks. He was the kind of kid that strangers smiled at in the grocery store line. The kind of kid who made you feel like you understood what you were put on earth to do. When he was 3, I noticed his eyes looked a little yellow. I thought it was the lighting in the bathroom. I thought it was nothing. I waited 2 weeks before I called the doctor. And I will never forgive myself for those 2 weeks, even though they tell me it wouldn't have changed anything. Biliary atresia. A condition where the bile ducts don't form properly. It had already progressed. He needed a new liver, or he wouldn't see his 5th birthday. I want you to understand what that sentence does to you. I want you to understand that there is no preparing for it, no matter how many times the words pass through your ears. He needed a new liver. My son, my 4-year-old who still slept with a stuffed elephant and called it Peanut. My husband Thomas was incredible. He worked double shifts at his job in Mississauga. He drove Callum to every appointment. He held my hand in every waiting room. He never once complained. We sold my car. We sold the furniture in the spare room. We set up a GoFundMe, and I wrote the most humiliating thing I've ever written in my life. The whole story. Callum's face, the prognosis, the costs. And we sent it to everyone we knew. And people gave. Strangers gave. People from my old high school, people from Thomas's hockey league, people from the Facebook group for biliary atresia families. $20 here, $50 there. Somebody sent $300 and just wrote. From one parent to another. I cried so hard I had to sit on the floor. But we were still short. The initial costs, the assessment fees, the imaging, the living donor evaluation were sitting at over $28,000 out of pocket before we'd even gotten on the transplant list at Toronto General. The province covers the surgery itself, but the lead-up, the time Thomas missed from work, the parking at the hospital that costs $18 a day, the hotel nights when we had to travel for specialist appointments, it adds up in a way that makes you feel like the system was designed to break you. We were $28,000 short. My parents have a house in Oakville, fully paid off. My dad retired from the city at 61 with a pension. My mom has her own RRSPs, a TFSA, and rental income from a basement unit they put in 3 years ago. They are not rich people, but they are comfortable people. They are people for whom $28,000 would not mean choosing between heat and groceries. I asked them once. Just once, I sat at their kitchen table, the same table I did homework at when I was 8. And I told them everything. The numbers, the timeline, the odds, what happens if Callum doesn't get on the list in time. I had a folder. I had printed everything out. I told them we weren't asking for a gift. We'd pay them back. We'd sign something, whatever they needed. My mom cried. She held my hand. She said, "You know we would if we could." My dad said the RRSP was locked in, that the line of credit was maxed, that things were tighter than they looked. He said they'd try to pull together something small, maybe a few thousand. Give it a month or two. A month or two. Callum didn't have a month or two to wait around. I thanked them. I drove home. I sat in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on the QEW for 45 minutes before I could see well enough to drive again. They sent us $800 2 weeks later. $800. My mom texted me a photo of a check and said, We scraped this together? We hope it helps. I deposited it. I said, thank you. What else was I supposed to say? Callum made it onto the list. A living donor match came through. A woman I've never met. A total stranger from Hamilton who saw the GoFundMe and got herself tested and turned out to be a match and decided to give a piece of her liver to a 4-year-old she'd never met. I will spend the rest of my life believing that some people are made of a different material than the rest of us. Her name is Brenda, and she is one of them. The surgery was 14 hours. I sat in a waiting room chair until I couldn't feel my legs, and then I sat some more. Thomas brought me coffee and I didn't drink it. A chaplain came and sat with us for a while and didn't say much, which was exactly right. Callum came through. He was in the ICU for 9 days. He had a fever that spiked on day 3, and I genuinely thought that was it. That was the moment everything went wrong. But they got it under control. And on day 7, he asked Thomas if he could have a hot chocolate. And Thomas cried in the hallway where Callum wouldn't see him. We brought him home in February. It was -18 and there was ice on the front steps. And I held him the whole walk from the car to the door, like he was made of glass. He slept for most of that first week. Then slowly, he came back. The dinosaur songs came back. The garbage truck songs came back. Peanut the elephant came back. My parents came to visit once during his recovery. They brought flowers and a card. My mom cried again. My dad patted Callum on the head and said he was a tough kid. I smiled. I said thank you. I let them hold him. I didn't know yet. I didn't know anything yet. It was Thomas who found out. He wasn't snooping. We were at my brother's place in Burlington for his birthday last spring, and my brother, who's 34 and works in finance and has always been the one my parents called the responsible one, which I spent 30 years not fully unpacking what that meant, had just moved into a new house. A new build. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a double garage, backing onto a ravine. Thomas was talking to my brother's friend in the backyard, just making conversation, and the friend said something about how lucky my brother was to have parents like that. Thomas didn't know what he meant. He asked. The friend assumed Thomas already knew. My parents had given my brother $85,000 for the down payment on that house. They gave it to him 8 months before they sat at my kitchen table and told me their line of credit was maxed. I need to stop here for a second and tell you what it actually feels like to learn something like that. Because I've tried to explain it to people and they always say that must have been awful. And yes, it was. But it's more specific than awful. It's a feeling like the floor has dropped out, but you're still standing where the floor was, floating in midair, and nothing that you knew to be true can be trusted anymore. Every memory reshapes itself. The look on my dad's face at the kitchen table. Was that guilt? Did he know what he was doing? Did they both sit there and say the words, "We can't afford it," while holding the knowledge of $85,000 in their heads? My son could have died. He almost died. He was in an ICU for 9 days with a fever, and a stranger from Hamilton had to give part of her liver because we couldn't get on the list fast enough, because we couldn't pay the fees because my parents said they were broke. They were not broke. They gave my brother $85,000 for a house. I didn't confront them right away. I spent 3 weeks trying to find an explanation that made it okay. Maybe it was a loan, not a gift. Maybe the timing was different than the friend said. Maybe there was something I didn't know. I called my brother. He confirmed it. He didn't even sound that apologetic. He said, "They wanted to help me get established." He said he'd assumed I knew. He said maybe I should talk to them. I called my mom and I asked her directly. I said, "Did you give my brother money for his house while you were telling me you couldn't help pay for Callum's transplant?" There was a long silence. Then she said, "That was a different kind of situation." I said, "How?" She said they'd been planning to help him for a long time, that it was already committed, that they didn't want to pull it back, that they thought we'd find another way. They thought we'd find another way. We did find another way. A stranger from Hamilton found the way for us. I told my mom I needed some time. I hung up. I didn't talk to either of my parents for 4 months. Callum is doing well now, if you're wondering. He just turned 7. He started soccer. He's obsessed with space. Black holes specifically, and he talks about them with an authority that makes his teachers laugh. He still sleeps with Peanut, but he keeps it on the shelf during the day now, very casually. Like that's been the plan all along. Thomas and I bought a small semi-detached in Hamilton. We're still paying off what we borrowed during Callum's treatment. We will be paying it off for a while. That's fine. We're together and Callum is alive and that math works out. My parents and I exist in a kind of surface peace right now. They see Callum for birthdays. We text. My mom sends articles she thinks I'd like. My dad asks about Thomas's job. I smile, and I answer, and I do not let them all the way back in, and I don't know if that will ever change. I haven't decided yet. I'm telling you all of this because of what happened in March. My brother called me on a Tuesday night. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't talked much since the conversation about the house money, and I wasn't feeling generous toward him. But I answered. He'd been diagnosed. Kidney failure. Serious. The kind that moves fast. His doctors were saying he needed a transplant, possibly within the year, and the waiting list in Ontario was long, sometimes 5 to 7 years long. And living donation was the better option if a match could be found. He was calling to ask if I would get tested. I sat very still for a long time after he said that. I was at the kitchen table. The same table where Thomas and I had spread out all those papers 3 years ago. All those printouts with the numbers and the timelines and the odds. I had a cup of tea in front of me. I watched the steam coming off it. My brother said my name. He said, "Are you still there?" I said yes. I said I needed to think about it. He said the doctors had already spoken to my parents, and they weren't matches. He said I was the closest family match they'd been able to identify. He said he was sorry for asking. He knew things had been complicated, but he didn't know what else to do. I said I'd call him back. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after we hung up. Thomas came in, saw my face, sat down next to me. I told him everything. He didn't say what I should do. He just held my hand. Here's the thing nobody tells you about holding a grudge. It's exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with anger. The anger is easy. The anger almost feels good, sometimes, because at least it has a shape. It's the grief underneath the anger that's heavy. Grieving the parents you thought you had. Grieving the family you thought you were part of. Grieving the version of those 3 years that could have gone differently if one person had made one different choice. I don't think my parents are evil. I've had a lot of therapy about this. Yes, I have a therapist. Her name is not relevant, but she is excellent. And I recommend her to everyone. And what I've come to understand is that my parents have a version of my brother that they've been carrying since before I was born. He's the oldest. He was the one they built the story around. When he needed something, it didn't feel like a choice to them. It felt like water flowing downhill. When I needed something, there was friction. There was hesitation. There was hesitation. There was a different calculation running underneath, one I was never going to win. That doesn't make it okay. Understanding something and forgiving it are not the same thing. But understanding it keeps me from spending my whole life waiting for them to become different people. I got tested. I don't want to be dramatic about the process. You go in, they take blood. They do a few different screenings. You wait. The transplant team at Toronto General is thorough. They are kind in a professional way, which is the right kind for that situation. I was a match. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes after I got the call. Level 3, between a minivan and a concrete pillar, under a flickering fluorescent light. I want to remember that detail, the flickering light, the way the concrete smelled like damp and exhaust, the sound of somebody else's car starting 2 rows over. I want to remember it because it was the moment I had to decide who I was going to be, not who my parents were, not who my brother had been. Me. I called my brother had been. Me. I called my brother back that evening. I told him I was a match. I told him that I needed him to understand something first. Not as a condition. I wasn't making deals, but because I needed to say it out loud to him, to his actual ears, not through my mom or through a phone call that he'd later misremember. I told him that what our parents did, the $85,000, the kitchen table conversation, the months that Callum spent fighting while they held that money and said nothing, I told him that nearly broke me in a way I don't think I'll fully recover from. I told him that I'm not saying he knew. I'm not saying he's responsible for what they chose. But I am saying that I assumed you knew is not an answer. And that when someone almost loses their child, the people who love that child should be running toward them, not assuming someone else will figure it out. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I should have done more. It wasn't enough. It's not enough now." But it was true, and he said it, and I'll take true over pretty. I told him I'd move forward with the evaluation. I told him I wasn't doing it for our parents, and I wasn't doing it to restore anything between us to what it was before, because I don't think it can go back there. I told him I was doing it because he's a person, and because Callum asked me once what happened to Uncle Darren, and I didn't want to be the reason for that answer. His name is Darren. The surgery was scheduled for May. I spent the weeks before in a kind of suspended state that's hard to describe. Not peaceful, not anxious, just very present. I noticed things. The smell of coffee in the morning. The sound of Callum's cleats on the back deck. The way Thomas always checks that the stove is off twice before we leave the house. My parents asked to see me before the surgery. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop in Oakville. Neutral ground. And they were both thinner than I remembered. And my dad's hands shook a little when he held his cup, which they didn't use to do. My mom said they were sorry. She said it more than once. She said they'd made a mistake, and they knew it, and there was nothing she could say to fix it, but she needed me to know. My dad looked at the table when she said it. Then he looked up and he said, "We were wrong. About all of it. I don't expect you to forgive us. I didn't tell them whether I would or I wouldn't. I don't know yet. I'm not in a hurry to decide. I did tell them that whatever happened next, between all of us, it needed to be about who we actually are, not who we've been pretending to be to keep the peace. That I couldn't do another 10 years of Christmas dinners where everything is fine and nothing is real." My mom nodded. She was crying. She said okay. The surgery went well. Darren is recovering. His doctors are cautiously optimistic in the way that transplant doctors are cautious about everything, which I understand now and which I don't take personally. I spent one night in the hospital and came home to Thomas and Callum and a handmade card that said, "Best Mom Forever," in purple crayon with a drawing of what I think is a superhero but might be a dinosaur. I put it on the fridge. It's still there. Brenda, the woman from Hamilton, Callum's donor, sent me a message when she heard what I'd done. I don't know how she heard. I cried when I read it. Some people are made of a different material. I want to be careful about how I end this, because I know what people want the ending to be. They want resolution. They want the parents to be fully accountable, the brother to be transformed, the family to be remade into something clean and clear, or they want the opposite. They want me to have walked away, to have said no, to have let the karma land where it was going. I didn't do either of those things. I did the thing that felt true, which was messier than either ending and probably less satisfying to describe. What I know is this. I'm not the same person I was before Callum got sick. I'm not the same person I was before I found out about the $85,000. I've been reshaped by those years in ways I'm still figuring out. Some of it made me harder and some of it made me softer. And I haven't always been able to tell which is which. One daughter is a doculum, is 7 and obsessed with black holes and plays soccer on Saturday mornings, and I am there on the sideline every week with coffee in my hand, and that is the whole world to me. One daughter is a doctor. Some strangers gave us $20 and $50 and $300 and a piece of a liver. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be that kind of person to someone else. What I know is that I have not fully forgiven my parents. I don't know if I will. I know that I'm not going to perform forgiveness to make holiday dinners easier, because I spent too many years performing things. And I'm done with that now. One daughter is a doctor. One daughter is a doctor. That one. Havili Atal. Me 10. I had to decide who I was going to be. I decided. And I can live with that decision. I can look at myself. That's not nothing. For where I started, that's not nothing at all. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to make a choice. Not a small choice, not coffee or tea, left or right, but the kind of choice that shows you who you are underneath everything you've been telling yourself you are. When Darren called me that Tuesday night, I had every reason to say no. I had reasons stacked up like evidence. The kitchen table. The folder with the printed numbers. The $28,000 we scraped together from strangers while my parents held $85,000 and said nothing. 9 days in the ICU, a fever that spiked on day 3. I had so many reasons that saying no would have felt almost logical, almost clean. But here's what I've come to understand. Not from any book or any philosophy. Just from living through the past 3 years in my own body. The choices we make when we have every right to choose differently, those are the ones that actually build us. Or don't. It goes both ways. My parents made their choice. They had the money, they had the means, and when their grandchild's life was on the line, they calculated something in the background. Something about my brother's future and their image of who he was and what he deserved. And they let that calculation win. I don't think they sat down and said, "We choose him over her." I think it was quieter than that, more automatic, the way water follows the path it's always followed. But the result was the same, and the result was that Callum spent 9 days in a hospital bed, while a stranger from Hamilton gave part of herself so he could live. What happened to my parents after that? Watching their son get sick, watching their daughter be the only one who could help. Sitting across from me in that coffee shop with thinner faces and shaking hands? That wasn't punishment from somewhere outside of them. It was just consequence. It was the shape that their choices eventually took in the real world. That's how it works, I think. Not dramatically, not with cosmic timing. Just slowly, the way things settle, and what I chose. To get tested, to show up, to say the hard thing to Darren before I agreed. That wasn't sainthood either. I want to be honest about that. There were nights I lay awake wanting to say no. Wanting to let the math of it land on them, the way it landed on me. I'm not going to pretend I'm above that feeling because I'm not. But when I sat in that parking garage under the flickering light, I thought about Callum. I thought about what I want him to grow up understanding about who his mother is. I thought about the woman from Hamilton who looked at a GoFundMe page and decided to rearrange her own body for a stranger's child. I thought about what it means to move through the world as someone who, when it mattered, did the harder thing. Intelligence isn't knowing the right answer. It's being honest about why you're choosing what you're choosing, even when the honest answer is uncomfortable. It's lame edcent of doubt. It's getting out of the parking garage anyway. I don't have this figured out. I'm still paying off the debt from 3 years ago. I'm still deciding, slowly, what I want my relationship with my parents to look like. I'm still working out what I can hold and what I have to set down. But Callum is 7. He plays soccer on Saturday mornings. He talks about black holes like he invented them. And I was there. For all of it, I was there. That's the only answer I need right now.